Administrator Regan and colleagues, constituents, welcome to this appropriations hearing on the fiscal year 2024 President's budget request for the Environmental Protection Agency. I want to welcome also Faisal Amin, EPA's Chief Financial Officer, who is joining the Administrator. Administrator Regan, climate chaos is here. We're seeing the impacts everywhere. The longer fire seasons, the more intensity of those fires, the decreased snowpacks, and the impact of that on our rivers and on our irrigation waters, the more severe weather events from the atmospheric rivers we've heard so much about on the West Coast this year, to warmer algae-infested lakes across the country, to droughts and record-shattering heat waves. Every part of the world is experiencing these impacts, and the damage is staggering and is going to increase exponentially unless we act decisively. I believe that to meet this moment, we have to accelerate our transition from fossil fuel energy to renewable energy. That we have to tackle that crisis both from the supply side of fossil fuels as well as from the demand side. This is why I adamantly oppose the Biden administration's approval of fossil fuel projects, one project after another. Not only does such approval slow the transition here in America, but it undermines our moral authority in the world. It's very hard to ask the rest of the world to transition off of coal or other fossil fuels to renewables when we're continuing to approve one fossil fuel project after another. The world needs American leadership, and to lead, we have to have the power of our example. While I believe that we're headed in the wrong direction in that regard, I do commend your agency for taking meaningful actions over the last several months. First, the cars and trucks emission rules are critical to decreasing our carbon footprint. The transportation sector is the largest source of carbon emissions in the United States, and that means we can't make meaningful progress without addressing those emissions. I'm a strong supporter of building and deploying more electric vehicles to reduce our greenhouse gases from transportation, and those proposed rules go a long way toward aggressively pushing our production in that direction. Recent press reports about EPA's plans for reducing power plant emissions also indicate a step in the right direction. Power plants, another major source of carbon pollution. And this latest rulemaking prioritizes the reduction of carbon emissions while promoting clean energy. In March, the Energy Information Administration forecasted that by the year 2050, wind and solar will account for 56% of electricity generation. Newly built gas plants will become stranded assets unless they have the most feasible new technology. The Inflation Reduction Act provided important incentives to clean up our power sector, and these rules leverage those new authorities and investments. These actions are commendable, common sense, and should be finalized as quickly as possible, which I'm sure you're thinking about every day. Today we are here to discuss the fiscal year 2024 budget request for EPA, which is $12.1 billion, a 19% increase from FY2023. This funding level would make up much needed ground at EPA after the past decade of budget gaps and the 4 years that the Trump administration spent gutting the agency. The budget includes the $5 billion to support the work of reducing emissions, increasing resilience, and engaging other nations in this shared challenge. It builds upon the work we made to remedy environmental injustice. The work we have done together over the years, including a huge step up from just $11 million to $105 million in FY22, was an important effort to tackle historic disparities in the burden of pollution. And I'm impressed that the EPA budget request again prioritizes environmental justice by including an additional $267 million increase to tackle this challenge. And I'll look forward to understanding the ways that you would see these funds spent to achieve that goal. You've also highlighted in this request that the EPA is working with the Forest Service on prescribed burns and a particulate matter standard for exceptional events. And this is critical back home in my state of Oregon, where wildfires are growing hotter and more devastating year after year. On the wildfire front, and on that particulate matter piece, I mean, the key is that we have to be able to do the prescribed burns, which sometimes will violate standards, and I know fitting that into the overall framework is important. On the wildfire front, I was especially pleased to see the agency release its notice of funding opportunity for wildfire smoke grants, which will close in less than a week. After communities across my state and much of the West were blanketed in smoke for weeks that was caused by historic wildfires a few years ago, I created this program to support local efforts to prepare for and protect against wildfire smoke hazards. I'm looking forward to seeing some real results to provide relief from pervasive smoke that threatens businesses and public health. Even with the increases proposed in this budget, the EPA budget is still less than it needs to be, because there's even more that needs to be done, as I'm sure you're pondering. We are behind in rebuilding the agency's workforce. The FY2024 staffing levels are still short of fiscal year 2009. We must make progress in hiring EPA's ecologists, hydrologists, toxicologists, and water infrastructure specialists who can meet the challenges we face with a changing climate, a chemical-based economy, and crumbling infrastructure. Finally, I look forward to talking more in depth about plastics. Just this year in East Palestine, Ohio, and in Richmond, Indiana, we had 2 horrific disasters that resulted in no small part from our addiction to plastics. And we're learning more and more about the problems plastics presents, both to human health and to damage to our ecosystems. And the fossil gas industry is seeking to use plastics as a way to expand their production, even as they are contributing enormously to climate chaos. So must more be done about plastic pollution, from wellhead to combustion to where it piles up. And I do appreciate your response to my April 5th letter about reports that the EPA has expedited the approval of chemicals that are produced through the pyrolysis of plastics. The articles written about that were very concerning. I appreciate your response, and if there's no objection, I'll enter into the record both my letter to you and your response. So entered without objection. I'm still concerned that the EPA is failing to protect frontline communities already overburdened with toxic chemicals and other forms of pollution when it comes to that process. The report by ProPublica and The Guardian shed light on a troubling approval process that EPA used for products from that so-called chemical recycling. While the April 21st strategy contains a testing requirement for new pyrolysis oils, a small step forward, the air pollution that may result from the new facilities may, in fact, increase the damage in already burdened communities. Similarly, approval expanding a fossil fuel pipeline in my state is contrary to the steps that Oregon has taken to build a clean energy future. I hope and expect the EPA to work with the federal family, FERC in particular, to respect the wishes of Oregonians, as well as Californians and Washingtonians, to stop that process from moving forward. According to FERC's analysis, the GTN Express project would emit 2.3 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions each year until at least 2052. Over the next 28 years, it will cause $9 billion in climate-related damage. And that's using a methodology that systematically minimizes the pipeline's climate impacts. Adding new emissions through pipeline expansions like the GTN Express is incompatible with President Biden's pledge, and it would undermine Oregon's efforts for a clean energy future. Now, I'm delighted that our ranking member is here, Lisa Murkowski, and we'll turn the microphone over to her.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. And Administrator Regan, welcome back to the committee. Good morning to you. Glad that we're able to discuss EPA's FY24 budget request with you this morning. I'm going to start off by just acknowledging and thanking you for the working relationship that you and I have built within your time in office and your team working with mine. Before I turn to more Alaska-specific issues this morning, I must note my concern over the direction that I believe the agency is taking with regards to recent and planned national regulatory actions. In particular, I believe the agency is engaging in regulatory overreach with WOTUS, which the Senate has expressed its disapproval on, as well as the newly proposed auto emission rule. If Press reports are true. EPA's soon-to-be-released power plant rule will follow the same unfortunate pattern. And these broad national regulations often have a disproportionate impact on the state of Alaska, as we've had an opportunity to discuss. With WOTUS, a very significant percentage of Alaska is considered a wetland. The finalized WOTUS rule fails to consider special characteristics in Alaska, such as permafrost, and will harm much-needed economic development within my state. Now, while I have serious concerns about how these national policies will negatively impact Alaska, I would like to focus on some more positive matters. And Administrator, I want to thank you sincerely for your and your agency's leadership on the issue of ANCSA contaminated lands. This is an environmental injustice that we have discussed. It's an environmental justice caused by the federal government. It has been left without action for far too long, but thanks to you and the support of colleagues here on the committee, we now have a new grant program within EPA to finally begin making a difference and remediate these contaminated lands. For colleagues' information, under the promise and the commitment to Alaska Native peoples with a Native Claims settlement, they were entitled to certain lands. We have worked to make good on that commitment, but unfortunately what happened over the course of years were contaminated lands that had been contaminated by our own federal government, are conveyed to the Native people in settlement for their lands. So what they receive is not only of questionable value, but in many times, the lands that they have received are making them ill, are making them sick. And so this was an injustice that must be corrected, and we're making a difference here. The agency's FY2024 request continues the new ANCSA Contaminated Lands Grant at $20 million, and I truly appreciate that. What happened with the EPA was considerable, because the EPA stepped forward into the leadership role on these ANCSA contaminated lands. I don't mean to pit one department against the other, but the fact of the matter is the Department of Interior has failed to be helpful on that issue. And so there were some key members on your team, Mr. Sixkiller. There were some others that, again, have just put their shoulder into this and really advanced this in a way that has been positive and remarkable. And I want to make sure that others know that you deserve this public commendation now. These efforts are going to directly improve the health and well-being of so many communities, and this work cannot be understated in its importance. So I hope, and I know, Administrator Regan, that there is more that you and I can do together to right this injustice in our Alaska Native communities. So I'm looking forward to finding further creative funding solutions with you. Certainly invite you to come to Alaska at any time to meet in some of these communities with me, and I know that we're looking forward to doing that at a point in time. I now want to turn to an issue that we have had opportunity to discuss before, and this is the agency's wood heater certification program. I get that this is a problem that you have inherited, but unfortunately, it's really coming to a head for communities of Fairbanks and North Pole in the interior part of my state. Earlier this year, the EPA partially accepted and partially rejected the state of Alaska's state implementation plan for PM 2.5. I believe that the agency fundamentally misunderstands the role that its flawed wood heater certification played in higher PM 2.5 emissions within the region. In fact, in February of this year, the EPA Inspector General released a report heavily criticizing the agency's handling of its wood heater program. The IG's report states that EPA's mismanagement has led to elevated PM 2.5 emissions, even though Congress has provided almost $100 million for wood stove changeouts over the last 8 years through the Targeted Airshed Grant. I've worked hard on that, I think you know. I've secured tens of millions of dollars for wood stove changeouts in the Fairbanks area through this grant. which should be good. It should be a positive. So I'm really very frustrated by the IG report's findings. By failing to properly certify and test wood heater emissions, the EPA has frustrated Congress's investments and intended goals. So, Administrator, I'm calling on your agency to fix its handling of the wood heater certification and testing program and to internally provide whatever resources are needed to achieve that. To show my commitment, last year we provided a $1 million increase for staffing and other efforts to help write the program, but it really is just not fair that my constituents in Fairbanks and in North Pole are going to face increased energy prices or perhaps even worse than that, actual energy insecurity due to potential enforcement actions that the agency may take against them for the agency's own mismanagement. I'm going to be up in Fairbanks this weekend, and I can tell you this is going to be a hot topic there. Lastly, I want to discuss with you the agency's handling of congressionally directed spending projects. I do appreciate that the Congress rather rapidly revived a significant workload for the agencies when we brought back CDS projects in FY22, but I don't think that excuses the agency's performance so far in executing these important and needed investments. The Congress has provided additional resources for the agency to implement a revived program, but I don't think that more staffing alone is going to fix the problem. I think that the agency has not made this a significant enough priority. In FY22 and 23, the Congress funded over 1,000 CDS projects for the EPA to manage, and to my knowledge, so far only a small percentage of the projects have been awarded. So I'm concerned about the pace, particularly since Congress looks poised to continue CDS projects for EPA into the future, as I think that they should. But the agency's got to do better here. And to show you that I'm going to be your partner in this, I'm certainly willing to work with you on any initiatives that you may have, any suggestions that you think can improve the speed of processing. This delay impacts projects nationally, but also significantly in my state of Alaska. I want to thank you for your help with several of those CDS projects, like the ANCSA contaminated lands, but also the Polaris building in Fairbanks. But just generally, I'm somewhat bewildered that critical water and wastewater infrastructure projects are lagging severely behind. So I hope that you and your team will be able to explore ways in which CDS projects can be awarded faster, including any creative solutions which we can help secure in our bill. I know that implementing these CDSs isn't easy, so I thank you for your work and all the agency personnel that are working on this. Hopefully, we can make these the success stories that we know they should and could be. I've given you a lot here in my opening statement, Mr. Administrator, but know that these are issues that are so important across the state of Alaska. We've got a good working relationship, I think a strong working relationship, and that's why I'm very comfortable raising these issues with you personally, because I think that we can make a real difference for the state of Alaska, and we can make a real difference across the country. So it doesn't mean that I'm going to stop knocking on your door anytime soon. We're going to work together, and again, look forward to the opportunity to be able to show you personally some of the challenges that we're facing and what more we can be doing to address them. With that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. On behalf of Chairman Murkey, let me recognize Director Regan for his opening statement. Mr. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Murkowski, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the necessary vision laid out in the United States Environmental Protection Agency's fiscal year 2024 budget request. In this request, we lay out an ambitious but transformative plan for the EPA with the goal of building a healthier, more prosperous nation while ensuring global competitiveness, energy independence, and energy security. President Biden's proposed FY2024 budget request for EPA provides $12.1 billion to advance key priorities, including protecting air quality, upgrading our nation's aging water infrastructure, tackling the climate crisis, and rebuilding core functions at EPA. Over the last year, EPA has made significant progress towards many of these goals. We've taken action to cut smog and hazardous air pollution, which will reduce the risk of cancer in nearby communities by almost 96%. In some communities, by 96%. We've taken strides to ensure that all people have clean water by proposing the first ever legal limits for PFAS and investing billions of dollars to remove 100% of lead pipes across this country. And we've accelerated our transition to a clean transportation future by proposing the strongest ever standards for cars and trucks, while awarding 2,400 clean school buses to school districts all across the country. I'm proud of the foundation that we've laid and the partnerships that we have underpinning our successes. But there's still so much more work to do so that all of our children have safe, healthy places to live, learn, and play, to build a stronger, more sustainable economy, and to advance American innovation and ingenuity. Simply put, investing in EPA is investing in America. Across the country, poor air quality still affects millions of people, perpetuating harmful health and economic impacts. In fiscal year 2024, the agency will protect air quality by cutting emissions of ozone-forming pollutants, particulate matter, and air toxics. The President's budget includes $1.4 billion to improve air quality and set standards that reduce pollution from mobile and stationary sources. EPA's work to set these standards provides certainty to industry, builds on advances in technology, and reinforces the market movement towards a cleaner energy system that provides reliable and affordable energy. A thriving economy also requires clean and safe water for everyone in this country. Although progress has been made, many still lack access to healthy water, face inadequate wastewater infrastructure, and suffer from the effects of lead pipes. America's water systems are also facing new challenges, including cybersecurity threat, climate change, and emerging contaminants such as PFAS. The budget proposes more than $4 billion to upgrade drinking water and wastewater infrastructure nationwide with a focus on underserved communities. Over the last year, I've had the privilege of traveling across the country, from Jackson, Mississippi to East Palestine, Ohio. I've visited communities and seen firsthand environmental and public health challenges many of your constituents continue to experience. I've spoken to families who've been sickened by the air they breathe. I've met with people who live with toxic waste in their backyard, and I've seen conditions that are simply unacceptable in the United States of America. From investing in our nation's climate resilience to cleaning up contaminated land and water, there is absolutely no shortage of important work to be done. Senators of the committee, EPA is up for the task. We're eager to work with all of you to deliver for our fellow Americans and to secure our nation's global competitiveness, but we need your support. Both the urgency and economic opportunity presented by climate change require that we leave no stone unturned. I'd also like to take a moment to remind folks that we must keep moving forward. 2024 will undoubtedly present a unique set of challenges, and moving backwards certainly is not an option. Reverting back to the fiscal year 2022 budget would force the agency to make very difficult decisions. EPA would have to cut hundreds of millions of dollars from programs that protect communities all across America, impacting our ability to hire critical staff, including toxicologists, engineers, scientists, and others who play a crucial role in protecting the people of this country and our planet. With a reduced budget, EPA may be forced to delay fixing America's aging water infrastructure. It might endanger our efforts to address climate change, and it might roll back our progress that we've made on environmental justice. President Biden's budget positions EPA to create durable environmental policy, invest in America, and set our nation on a path to win the 21st century. It will also allow us to address the environmental concerns of millions of Americans and fundamentally improve people's lives for the better. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to submit this testimony for the record, and I look forward to our continued partnerships to achieve these ambitious yet necessary goals and welcome all questions. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, and we're going to have 7-minute rounds, and I'll ask everyone to wrap up their questions as their time runs out so we can make sure everyone gets a chance to ask their insights, and we'll have probably an opportunity for several rounds. I'll just begin, Administrator Regan, by asking you about the House Majority proposal to freeze funding to FY22 levels And a consequence is it would translate to EPA state, tribal, and local grant and infrastructure accounts it would cut it by nearly $1 billion, including a $600 million cut on the program that would replace lead pipes and upgrade drinking water systems and support other water infrastructure. It seems like that's at odds with bipartisan support for water infrastructure. And but I wanted to give you an opportunity to clarify what that House proposal level would do.
Well, thank you for the question, and our job is fundamentally about keeping people safe, to safeguard the very things that we all as Americans hold dear, like the assurance that when our children turn on their tap water, the water they drink will be clean, or when they play outside, the air that they breathe will be safe. Undoubtedly, if we were to roll back the budget to 2022 levels, it would force us to make some very difficult decisions in terms of protecting the health and safety of all Americans. It would also cut hundreds of millions of dollars from programs that impact the market. We understand that there are pesticides and herbicides that need to make it to the markets to give all of our farmers the tools that they need to be successful to feed this country. And so there will be significant impacts on the EPA's ability to put significant products on the market, to continue to help this country be competitive from a global economic standpoint, but more importantly, sacrifice potentially the health and safety of some of our fellow citizens.
So if I can simplify just to the lead pipes issue, since that is a condition that affects the developing brains of our babies and our children has been a big concern, would that proposal significantly cut the removal of lead pipes, resulting in more damage to more children?
It absolutely will.
Thank you. In April 21, or April 21st, President Biden signed an executive order for a whole-of-government approach to environmental justice, and you have significant responsibilities under that order. And it directs the agencies to use science and data to make determinations about project permitting. Can you share what the most important tools are that EPA gained in that executive order and how you plan to use them to directly impact environmental justice communities?
Well, thanks to the President's leadership, he made environmental justice a pillar of this administration from day one. And so we moved very quickly, thanks to your partnership and others, to create a new national program. And by what I mean by new is we reorganized with the resources that we had. We put 3 offices together to focus on environmental justice and external civil rights. There are a number of tools in that executive order that have been adopted by the White House that will be used across the federal family so that we can ensure that our regulations match with the direction that the White House and other agencies are pursuing so that we can protect every single person in this country equally under the law. We've made a lot of strides in environmental justice. I'm proud of our environmental justice record. I'm proud of the tools that we have at our disposal. But now we have an entire federal family that's rowing in the same direction to ensure that all people in this country are protected.
And you've proposed a very significant increase in the environmental justice funding. Can you translate just in common language what that will mean for communities that have been burdened by high levels of toxic chemicals?
It'll be tremendous. I believe as a former state regulator that states know their communities quite well, and communities know them even better. And many of the solutions that communities have had for decades on helping to reduce pollution and remove themselves from the front lines need to be matched with funding. With the request that we've asked, it gives us more personnel to be out in the fields, engaging with the communities, looking at those solutions and matching those with the significant grants and resources that the agency can bring to bear. In some cases, because of income and because of race, because of zip code, we are seeing an undue and unfair burden on our constituents, whether it's Lowndes County, Alabama, or whether it's McDowell County, West Virginia. This is an issue that plagues this country, and it is our job to be sure that every single person in this country has access to clean air and clean water.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to see the proposal for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or the Green Bank, that EPA is starting to implement as part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Oregon certainly has ambitious renewable energy goals, and there's an opportunity for that kind of funding. Oregon does not have its own green bank in place, however. Will you commit to making sure that Oregon and other states that don't have their own green banks can still have access to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And what is your plan for ensuring that funding actually makes it to environmental justice communities?
Well, at EPA, we've built environmental justice into our very DNA. And so, number one, we have some very concrete metrics that are attached to this $27 billion to be sure that disadvantaged communities and those who are disproportionately impacted have access to this capital. We plan to make 2 to 3 awards under the National Clean Investment Fund, an additional 2 to 7 awards under the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, which will definitely partner with more grassroots organizations, community development banks, and the like. And then we have about $6 billion to focus on, or $7 billion to focus on a solar for all competition. And so we're going to build in metrics to be sure that those who need these resources the most have a seat at the table and have an opportunity to invest in this new clean energy economy.
In 25 seconds, do you want to explain the Solar for All?
You know, this is an opportunity to provide up to 60 grants to states, tribal governments, municipalities, and nonprofits to expand specifically the number of low-income and disadvantaged communities that are primed for investments in residential and community-scale solar.
Thank you. Perfect. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Regan, I mentioned at length in my comments my concern with regards to the wood heater program and the certification, and have suggested that it's unacceptable that the communities of Fairbanks and North Pole are effectively going to bear this burden for actions where the agency has failed, and that the program has to be fixed. I think we recognize that it has to be fixed, and I think it has to be done at whatever expense necessary. So I appreciate the engagement that you and your staff have led on this to write this. I'm certainly following this very carefully, but I do understand that you have recently responded to the Inspector General report. Can you tell me what steps the EPA is taking internally to improve the wood testing and certification standards and the enforcement of those standards?
Well, thank you for the question, and we are absolutely taking the OIG's report very seriously. And in implementing some of those recommendations, we are strengthening our commitment to work with the Alaska DEC, Fairbanks North Star Borough, and other key people in the community. We're also designing a program using $15 million in funding from IRA for testing and other activities to address these emissions from the wood stoves. I want to let you know, Senator, that this issue has my attention. We will continue to prioritize it with these IRA dollars, with the OIG report, and with enforcement discretion. I believe that we can resolve this issue.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the commitment that you've made to reform this program and making that a priority. You all also heard my thanks for EPA's leadership in the ANCSA contaminated lands effort. I think you would agree with me that this is one of those situations when we talk about environmental injustice, you can park this program here right there under that category. So I'm going to continue to be a very zealous advocate for our Alaska Native communities and writing this. We've made some good progress, but I think we recognize that there is so much that has to be done in this area. So I would like your commitment that the agency will maintain its leadership role on the issue and to continue to work with me on all avenues so that we can move the needle on ANCSA-contaminated lands.
Absolutely. And we're really excited in the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a couple of programs there that we can access through that environmental justice lens to help expedite some of the work that we've partnered on. So I'm really excited about that. And thank you for the inclusion of the $20 million in the fiscal year 2023 annual appropriation. I think we're going to leverage all of these resources to finally bring some justice to this situation.
Good. Well, that's excellent to hear and to know that you're looking at the opportunities within IRA. So I'd love to have further conversation with you. I know we had hoped to have a call before this hearing. Perhaps we can do it as a follow-on, but I thank you for that.
Absolutely.
I also mentioned my concern with how the rollout or how the implementation of CDS projects is coming through the agency. And I have suggested and would strongly encourage EPA to explore some creative solutions to expedite these project awards, whether it's co-management with states, programmatic NEPA, or categorical exclusions, any of these other ideas. I'm not convinced that funding for hiring more personnel is the sole solution and may not even be the most efficient. But know that I'm ready, willing, and able to help secure new authorities in appropriations bills if it's needed. So I guess what I'd like to hear from you this morning is whether you also are concerned about the execution and the process going forward, and whether or not we need to speed up project awards and make it a top-tier priority like I do.
Yes, it's a top-tier priority. I am concerned with the speed of getting these resources to these communities. So we are looking at innovative ways to do so while maintaining or staying within those lines that would be sufficient for oversight. We're also, many of these communities have never received this level of funding before. Right. And so we're having to deploy a lot of technical assistance and new programs to be sure that they are prepared to receive these dollars and stay within the bounds of the law. I believe with the $15 million received last year, a fresh approach to looking at how to streamline this and pushing out more technical resources, we can begin to get this program on the right track.
Well, I'd ask that we have an opportunity to have a follow-on meeting with your team and our committee staff to discuss some of the ideas on how we can really improve this, especially ones outside of asks for more funding for staff. So if you can commit to working with us on that.
I do.
Good. PFAS. Everybody's talking about PFAS, rightfully. And certainly in Alaska, we remain very, very concerned. We had included $10 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law to begin tackling PFAS. I think that's a good investment. When I talk to communities in my state, they very much want to take on PFAS, but they're concerned about national regulations and how they could potentially amount to new unfunded mandates. They also express that the state of remediation technology is not as advanced as it should be. We've got some groups in Alaska that I think are being innovative and working on some cutting-edge PFAS remediation technology. That's encouraging there. But how do you view the concerns of communities that are going to have to meet these stringent drinking water and CERCLA standards with no further financial help from the government? And are we in a good place with testing and remediation technologies? Are they affordable for the water systems, ready to be applied at a national scale? Everybody's talking about this.
Yes. I can say, coming from North Carolina and facing this firsthand, a lot of small communities, that's first and foremost on my mind. Of the $10 billion for PFAS in bill, we know that $5 billion is dedicated specifically for small, disadvantaged rural water systems. We want to continue to match those dollars with our traditional budget and dollars from USDA and other places to be sure that our small, disadvantaged and rural communities aren't left behind. We do believe, and we are investing in new testing methods to detect this. We also know that there are existing technologies. We're hoping that those costs will come down. But we want to engage with communities like the ones you've mentioned that have some innovative ideas for mitigation and detecting, because we are in that research and development mode, and all options should be considered.
Well, hopefully we'll have an opportunity for you to meet some of the folks that are moving out on some of these good ideas. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director, for joining us today. And like many of my colleagues, I'm still reeling from the proposed House Republican budget, which would substantially cut EPA. In fact, I think from your letter, you indicated it'd be the lowest funding level since 2013. In 2013, I was chairman of the committee, and Senator Murkowski was a ranking member. A lot has changed since 2013. Yes. And a lot of new problems have emerged. We're requiring resources to deal with those problems. One of the issues we've all spoken about is the lead pipe challenge and making sure everyone has clean drinking water. The proposed Republican budget would slash $626 million from that program. It would set it back tremendously. But there's so many other areas, and one area that I think would be also hit would be appropriate staffing levels for EPA so it could do its job. Is that a concern you have?
It is a concern. It is a concern, whether it be thinking through our enforcement capabilities to help disadvantaged communities that are impacted by lead or by PFAS or by, chemical facilities, or again, whether it's in my engagements with our agriculture community. The courts have taken away so many tools from our farmers. They have taken so many pesticides and herbicides off the shelves. We need the staff and the resources to get new products on the market so that our farmers can have all the tools that they need.
Well, I think also from your experience as a state regulator, you know that one of the most frustrating things is to go to a regulatory agency, and because they're understaffed, underfunded, they're not able to respond to a request for a permit or anything else. And what that does is undercut, frankly, the faith in the institution. And I'm beginning to think more and more that this approach of budget cutting is not just about saving money, it's about devaluing the institutions that are necessary to compete and succeed in this world. That might be more commentary than question, but any thoughts you have?
I think that's absolutely correct. Listen, I've spent more time than any administrator with our agriculture community. I just did a session with a bunch of CEOs and executives from the auto industry. I've met with all of our CEOs in the power industry. We have staff that are working with their staffs to be sure that we're taking advantage of the latest technologies. And we have forged a relationship so that we can keep this country globally competitive. Reduction in staff really does reduce our ability to help our economy grow and help us to be sustainable.
And with respect to the lead pipe issue, which we talked about, I can't emphasize enough how critical it is, because exposure to lead in a child has extreme consequences, neurological development, cognitive development, and there are a lot of young people, because they've been not fortunate enough to live in wealthy communities, have been exposed to lead infected, perhaps, water, and their ability to function is impaired for a lifetime. So this is I think, not just a issue of cost-benefit analysis, it's also a moral imperative. And I think we have to do much more, and cutting these monies seems to me to be not just inefficient, but rejecting a commitment we should have.
I absolutely agree. We received, fortunately, $15 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law. But over the past year, we've worked with every state in the country. We've developed a more robust inventory. We know that we have 9 million lead service lines in this country. We know that's close to 40 billion in needs. We have to close this gap. There is absolutely no acceptable or safe level of lead exposure for our children or for anyone.
Thank you very much, Director. Director, one of the programs we were able to pull together was the geographic programs of EPA, and we were fortunate enough to create one that dealt with Southern New England, the Southern New England program, or SNEP. And one of the critical reasons, it's a problem that Senator Murkowski doesn't have because Alaska is pretty big, but Narragansett Bay occupies a large portion of our state, but its waters come from two adjacent states, Massachusetts and Connecticut. So unless we have a regional approach to issues of pollution, et cetera, we can't literally effectively control the quality of water in Narragansett Bay, the quality of water throughout Rhode Island. So we have this program, which is extremely effective, and it's one of several programs throughout the United States. And again, they are in severe jeopardy of being eliminated, underfunded, or understaffed. Can you speak to the importance of these programs and also the efficiency?
I can. Very important program. And listen, in the president's budget, there's an increase of $78,000 above 2023 that we would like to help ensure and bolster this program. The SNEP program, as you said, serves as a hub to enable protection and restoration of coastal watersheds of the Southeast New England. Protecting these watersheds and ecosystems, ecosystem services provide and help sustain the region's communities and environmental assets well into the future. And I will say that we recognize this program draws on a network of stakeholders and experts that seek out and support innovative practices that complement the work that all of us are doing to protect this watershed. So extremely, extremely important, and also a great organization and a great program that does a lot of good work, not just for the ecosystem, as you know, but for the economy in our New England states.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Director. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Britt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, thank you for being in front of our committee today. I appreciate your work and your interest in Alabama. Your reference to Uniontown is something that I appreciate. It's something that I've been working on for years. Actually, as a staffer in this very building, got to work under Senator Shelby's leadership to help secure a $23.4 million grant from USDA Rural Development to get to work on this very issue. Additionally, we added that to Congresswoman Terry Sewell's work on the House side with a $1.8 million revenue stream moving to help fix this problem. We certainly know and believe that we have to upgrade and repair these systems, and so certainly look forward to working with you moving forward.
Absolutely.
As you know, Congress was disapproved a few weeks ago of EPA's new WOTUS rule, and I'm grateful that Alabama is currently protected from its impacts by a federal court ruling. When farmers wake up early in the morning to take on their day, from feeding their cows to mending fences to planting to harvesting, they have enough on their plate. They should not have to worry that ponds, ditches, or mud holes on their private land are federally regulated. The uncertainty of Biden's WOTUS rule has created and continues to create unsustainable state of shifting permitting in this country. The cost is hundreds of thousands of dollars for Americans to comply with ever-changing regulations. Alabamians shouldn't need to pay a lawyer to find out if a ditch on their land is now federally regulated. Mr. Administrator, when the EPA calculated the economic cost benefits of the new Biden WOTUS rule, did the EPA consider the impact of that uncertainty that was created by the ambiguity?
You know, thank you for the question. And, you know, I think that I'd like to say that I have tried my best. I've met with more of our ag constituency than any administrator prior to me. And I also know, though, that the ambiguity isn't just solely on EPA. I think multiple Supreme Courts have weighed in on this. At least 3 to 4 administrations have tried to get this right. What we've done is we've taken a look at what the courts have ruled prior, what the Supreme Court has said prior, and we attempted to put a rule in place that was much more durable legally than we've seen in the past.
Do you think it had an economic impact?
Well, I think that everything that we do can have a plus or minus economic impact, which is why we work so hard to provide the certainty that other administrations have failed to provide so far.
So on the primary economic analysis on this WOTUS rule, it said it would have no economic impact, and you signed off on that. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think that your question in terms of uncertainty of the economic impact is one that I would not say reject the premise of the question, but the economic assessment that we do is based on our legal assessment of what the law requires and what we put in place so that farmers do have the certainty to comply with the rule. And I will say that work very closely with Secretary Vilsack at USDA to be sure that as we implemented the rule, we'd be able to leverage resources across the federal family. So we believed that the economic impact would be positive because we thought that the farmers and the farmer community would have some certainty.
Well, I can assure you that there are economic impacts, and unfortunately, many of those have been negative. In Alabama alone, SBC says over 64,000 small businesses have been impacted by this, and that's 165,000 employees. So I am of the belief that our cattlemen, our foresters, and our farmers have tended to their land for generation upon generation. And they actually depend on the fruitfulness of that land to continue to do the job that they love. And I believe that food security is national security. And if we can't feed or clothe ourselves, nothing else matters. So I appreciate your attention to the negative economic impacts that have come as a result of this. I've noticed a pattern of concern from people coming to my office discussing the EPA. Many have feared that the EPA is regulating past what science will support or technology that's available. Just to put it bluntly, Alabamians fear that EPA regulations are more predicted based on the Green New Deal ideology than that of the science and technology before us. With PFAS, the current EPA proposal stretches the limits of what can be consistently tested. Complying with the levels proposed, even if possible, would divert millions of dollars from needed infrastructure upgrades. And worse, the term that I continue to hear from people is bankruptcy. For power plants, there are fears that the EPA will impose technologies that are not readily available or that can actually not be implemented at this time. And of course, there's pesticides. In 2021, your agency eliminated the use of chlorpyrifos for soybeans, cotton, and for other crops. In the past, you've said you agreed with USDA on the science of this pesticide, and actually the Secretary of USDA has personally written that there are safe uses to this product. Since then, there's been blame that's been shifted to the band on the Ninth Circuit Court for, quote, setting the bar too high. I understand that the ban was consistent with, obviously, the platform with the Democratic Party in 2020, but I get the political dynamics, but I'm asking you, what I don't understand is, do you think that there are good uses for this? And if so, how can we get back to utilizing them?
Well, I think that the Secretary of Vilsack and I are, number one, working very closely together.
That's great to hear.
Number two, we both believe and share science. I think what Secretary Vilsack has said a number of times publicly, and I'll repeat it, is that, USDA has its perspective, EPA has its, but I'm the one that has to show up in front of the judge. And when the Ninth Circuit set the bar so high that EPA had a burden of proof that historically has never been placed before, we had to make a decision to follow the law. So I think there is a way that you can follow the law and the science, and they may not agree.
What about the 11 safe uses? Do you feel like we can allow growers, can EPA find a way to allow growers to use those?
I think that what the EPA has done and will continue to do is try to meet the bar that the Ninth Circuit has set. I think we can talk science for days, and I think we can get to some agreements on sort of impact science. But I think when the courts give you a mandate...
Have you appealed that? Has
think you
EPA
have
appealed that mandate?
I think EPA presented the best case it could, and the
But
court,
you have not appealed.
So let me just be clear that the courts, in its writing, expressed serious frustrations with the agency's decisions in the past, and expressed serious frustrations with where we were on chlorpyrifos, on endangered species, and the like. So, you can only tempt fate so many times, and what I pledge to do as administrator is respect the letter of the law.
Well, I would hope that you would consider appealing that and helping farmers find a way to use the 11 safe uses of this. Thank you so much for your time. I have run out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Merkley, and your ranking member, Senator Murkowski. It probably feels like everybody's heard me say this a million times, but it matters, so I'm going to say it again. As we continue our progress to return to regular order, this hearing provides another critical opportunity to look at why it is so important to families that we all work in a timely, bipartisan way to pass our funding bills and make sure we are actually providing the resources necessary to keep people safe. Because safety is about more than just how strong our military is. Families want to know if they have clean air and clean water and that their kids aren't being sickened by pollution. Fishers and our farmers want to know the ecosystem that they rely on, that our economy relies on, is not being harmed by dangerous chemicals. And communities want to know we are making meaningful progress to cut emissions and fight the expansive existential threat that is the climate crisis. The bottom line is that if we want to make sure people in this country are safe, we need to make sure they aren't breathing smog or drinking contaminated water or being exposed to chemicals like PFAS. And by the way, we are learning more and more about just how serious a threat PFAS is to public health. So I hope and expect this committee will work in a bipartisan way to deliver solutions. PFAS, or forever chemicals, aren't just toxic, they are everywhere, to the point where they can even be found in our blood. We need to make sure we are cutting down on pollution, not cutting the funding EPA needs to protect our kids. So I'm glad we have this opportunity today to talk about the critical issues that are threatening our environment, our economy, and our families, and how we can get EPA the resources it needs to keep our country safe, healthy, and competitive. With that, Mr. Administrator, thank you for being here. I'm going to talk about Pacific Puget Sound recovery, and salmon and steelhead recovery remains, as you know, an urgent undertaking in my home state. And EPA's geographic programs and National Estuary Program plays an important role in habitat restoration for those foundational species. The fiscal year 2023 omnibus included robust funding for those programs, and as part of the WRDA, Congress authorized the new Puget Sound Recovery National Program Office in EPA and a Puget Sound Federal Leadership Task Force. I'm really glad to hear that the first task force meeting is actually taking place tomorrow. But can you give us an update on the work that EPA is doing to stand up both those entities and what resources may be necessary to better coordinate restoration and protection of Puget Sound?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your leadership on the Puget Sound. And we have been a partner for a long period of time. I believe Deputy Assistant Ed McCabe recently visited. Of the fiscal year 2023 increase of $20 million, $17 million of that is immediately going towards the strategic initiative lead cooperative agreements we have for safe shellfish habitat and stormwater projects in Washington. For our tribal partners, Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission is working to finalize the work plans for each of the tribes in the next couple of months for ongoing tribal-led projects. And so we plan to announce a second round of funding in the coming months. We also have an RFA of up to $30 million out to support riparian habitat and climate resilient projects. And so there is a number of resources, a number of strategies put in place to be sure that our partnership is strong on the Puget Sound.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Administrator Regan, as you know, House Republicans last week voted for very deep across-the-board cuts to discretionary spending over the next 10 years. Can you talk about how those steep cuts would undermine EPA's ability to respond to and address PFAS contamination already in our environment?
Well, thank you for that. And we know that PFAS is such a visceral issue that we're all having to address, and we can't ignore the science. We have put in place a PFAS strategic roadmap. We have about $10 billion from bill to address PFAS, but we all know that that's not enough. Many of our small rural communities are struggling with this issue, and so we are working very strategically with the resources we have on R&D, partnering with our federal family to determine the safe levels and how to regulate this forever chemical. And as we do such, we're also leveraging billions of dollars from the bipartisan infrastructure law to ensure that disadvantaged communities and rural water systems have access to those resources so that they can keep pace with these regulations. Listen, it's our job to keep people safe, and we recognize that there are technologies on the market and they're expensive, And so we're trying to work on a path where we can bridge that gap between safety and technology and detection, and that's what we're doing on behalf of the American people.
And how would the House budget that they passed affect that?
It would significantly set us back. The House budget cuts on PFAS, on lead, on chemical detection in this country would significantly set us back. And as I said in my opening statement, we're moving forward. We need to continue to move forward because there's so much more work that needs to be done. We shouldn't be moving backwards, especially on TSCA, PFAS, lead, and getting tools out there as herbicides and pesticides for our farming community.
Okay, thank you. And I was really pleased to see the recent $400 million notice of funding opportunity for the Clean School Bus Grant Program that we established in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I was glad that you were actually out in Washington State last October to highlight this and the difference it's going to make. This is a program that is so great. It's really going to improve the health of kids and communities across the country and cut costs for our schools and reduce emissions and support good-paying jobs. So I was pleased to see that. I wanted to ask you, during the application phase and in the review process, how is EPA going to work to make sure that our underserved communities, including those on the prioritized school district list, are competitive in this program?
We've been doing that from day one. Of the billions of dollars that have hit the streets so far, 99% of the grants have gone to rural, disadvantaged, or low-income communities. And I have to say, some of my best visits around electric yellow school buses have been in some of our rural communities, rural places like Alma, Kansas, where they're using these school buses not only to transport children to and from school, but those batteries are serving as backup capacity for the rural electric cooperatives. So these communities are being very strategic in how we use this technology beyond the yellow school buses, and it's really exciting to see our rural communities do that.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Regan, I was glad to see that the EPA issued an emergency fuel waiver last week to allow E15 to be sold this summer. Providing access to E15 helps families save money at the gas pump. It's better for our environment, and it boosts our nation's energy security. While the emergency fuel waiver is a good thing, I believe we need a permanent fix, and I have a bipartisan bill for that. The Consumer and Fuel Retailer Choice Act, it ensures nationwide permanent access to E15. Mr. Administrator, will you commit to working with me to get this bill out there and hopefully enacted so that we can ensure that we have that E15 for our consumers in future years?
The President has pledged that biofuels, especially advanced biofuels, would play a part in this economy as we move forward. So I look forward to partnering with you and your staff with technical assistance to be sure that we can make E15 more accessible.
Great. We look forward to working with you on that. Thank you, sir. I'd like to also discuss a proposed rule on reporting requirements for emissions from animal waste under EPA. In 2019, when EPA proposed the current exemption for animal waste air emissions, the National Association that represents state emergency response commissions, the tribal emergency response commissions, and local emergency planning committees was supportive of this narrow exemption. In a letter to EPA in 2017, they stated about EPA emergency release reports for animal waste emissions, quote, "These reports are of no particular value to LEPCs and first responders, and they are generally ignored because they do not relate to any particular event." EPA has requested an additional $8.4 million for state and local prevention and preparedness under your EPA authorities. Do you believe that that is a good use for EPA resources to require reporting of animal air waste emissions, or to put it more frankly, manure smells, that local emergency planning commissions have stated are of, quote, no particular value?
I would say that we are responding to a couple of things. The first is we've had some of our states request that we take another look because technology has evolved, access to data has evolved. A number of communities on the ground have requested this. So this isn't a rulemaking. This is our desire to reevaluate sort of how this plays into the broader decision-making at the state and federal level.
Have you reached out to all states, to the Department of Environmental Quality, for example? Have you reached out to all states on that, or are you basically hearing just from the states that want to have a new look at it?
Let me circle back and see
Okay.
if we've heard from all 50 states on this and how we've been communicating with all of our states on this, revisiting this. I can follow up with you on that.
Okay, that would be great, because I know there are probably just as many states that would take an opposite view on it. And as you said earlier, to one of the questions that my colleagues asked, it's important to follow the science on it and make sure that we are promoting fact-based policies that have a tremendous impact on each individual state, depending on their situations. The bipartisan infrastructure law, which I supported, it made historic investments in water infrastructure and in many cases targeted those resources towards disadvantaged communities. The law continued to defer to states on how to define a disadvantaged community for many programs, including those state revolving funds. This flexibility to tailor resources towards an individual state needs, I believe, is definitely a benefit, and it's not a flaw of the state revolving funds. I've heard both concerns and also a lot of confusion on how EPA is overseeing these programs or how you might oversee them in the future. I think some of the confusion is it's grown because of various memos that have been put out and guidance from the EPA and from administrative executive orders. For example, Justice 40 initiative created by the administration states a goal of providing 40% of the benefits of federal investment towards disadvantaged communities. Can you tell me just how the Justice 40 initiative squares with explicit statutory considerations, such as in distributing the state revolving funds? For example, does EPA have their own disadvantaged community definition? Do you require 40% of a state's project to meet that definition if you do have that?
So I can answer it in terms of the way you framed it with the state revolving loan fund. By law, 49% of those resources go to disadvantaged communities. And I think we were quick out of the gates to partner with our states. I'm a former state regulator, so I understand the importance of that. And listen, there were people that had doubts, but I can say that working with Senator Capito, West Virginia, and some of our southern states were the first to revamp their definition of disadvantaged communities so that we could get this money out the door much quicker than needed. And so I believe that Justice 40 is perfectly aligned with the traditional construct of this program. And I was very pleased in the first year of the bipartisan infrastructure law that many of our states brought their definitions up to speed. These definitions look different in different states because of different makeup and lots of other issues, but I believe that our states have a critical role to play. And the last thing I'll say is that's true with this budget request. 85% of the increase in our budget goes to states and tribes. Our states are very strong partners with this agency, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for being here, Administrator. I want to talk to you broadly about the Superfund program. There are 17 active sites in Montana, 1,300 nationally, that are in the process of being cleaned up. Your budget says nationally 22% of our population lives within 3 miles of a Superfund site, and you also talk about how successful and impactful the work of the program is on the health of families and children who live and grow up in these areas. In the last Congress, we worked together, members of this committee, in a bipartisan way to provide EPA one of the largest funding increases for any federal agency, largely to accelerate and expand the work of the Superfund program. In your opening statement, you talk about moving forward, not moving backward. However, your budget request for the coming fiscal year is only 25% of the FY23 allocation. Now, look, I've sat on this committee for a while. I've chaired a few committees, and I've been in Democrat and Republican administrations, and they both tend to play games. The truth is, we don't play games with Superfund sites. There was a lot of funding made available through a process called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Plan and the regular appropriations. We did that to address Superfund problems quicker, not to reduce annual appropriations. Can you explain to me how the hell you can justify a 75% decrease from last year, because we haven't had a 75% decrease in Superfund demand?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question, and absolutely, I agree with you that we don't need to move backwards and don't need to play any games. The budget for this year is based on the transition of the traditional program to the Superfund tax receipt program. And so this was based on Treasury's forecast that a collection of $2.5 billion in Superfund tax receipts would be achieved in 2023, which will be available for use in our 2024 Superfund program. So we shifted from a traditional program that would ask for these allocations.
So let me ask it to you this way. So you're gonna get it from self-funding methods, is what you're saying, the tax that you guys apply to Superfund sites.
Yes.
So your overall top dollar figure that you're gonna spend on Superfund cleanup this next year is gonna be as high or higher than what you spent last year?
Predictions would say that it's going to be higher than what we did last year, which is why in this budget we're asking for a few more staff so that we can keep going.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And we're going to hold you accountable to it.
Okay.
Administrator Regan, I want to talk specifically about waste-in-place remedies for Superfund sites. We've got a lot of these sites in Montana, Butte, Smurfit-Stone, there are others. I can tell you that a lot of folks in these communities and across the state are really concerned about waste-in-place remedies. Last year when you testified before this committee, I discussed this issue with you. I sent you a detailed letter outlining my concerns about this remedy. Guess what? I didn't get a response. So we're going to start again, okay? Can you tell me how community members concerned about waste-in-place remedies can raise concerns with your agencies and receive honest answers, and answers that don't come from the corporation that's responsible for the waste-in-place in the first place?
Well, number one, we should definitely get you that response in a much quicker time, and we'll do that. I'll circle with staff.
Even a response, period. Not only in quicker time, I didn't even get one, okay?
All right. Point taken.
All right.
Community engagement. We have beefed up our community engagement. We at EPA need to be on the ground in these communities, walking through.
Gotcha. And we're going to get to that point in a second on the community engagement. Tell me how, short of community engagement, that if I'm a concerned citizen about waste in place, that I could actually get an answer from the EPA when the senior U.S. Senator couldn't get an answer from the EPA.
Well, number one, I'll check with my staff, but I believe we have been on the ground, and I believe we've beefed up our community engagement opportunities because we want to be able to explain the science, the specific science. These are specific remedies on a case-by-case basis. And listen, I agree with you 100%. People need to feel confident.
If they're not bought in, you can't do your job.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I agree with that.
So tell me how the EPA verifies waste-in-place remedies are actually going to be viable over the long haul.
Well, number one, we believe and stand by the science in the waste in place, right? Number two, we have to explain that.
So where's the
to
science
communities.
coming from?
Well, number one is from the programs, the Superfund program. We have some of the best.
Okay.
We have some of the best scientists and the best remedial experts in the world.
Does it include feedback from universities?
It absolutely does. It includes feedback from
Neutral
universities.
parties to verify the science?
Neutral parties, stakeholders. I'm not saying that we take all this information in, and no, we don't take everybody's advice 100% because we're the experts.
Does the verification include things like test wells that are being drilled and sampling that's being done and how flood mitigation is being planned for?
Let me get back to you because the answer from my vantage point is it should be, and I believe it is, because we have to do all of these things to ensure that when you store waste in place for hundreds of years, that it is safe for every community.
And by the way, this isn't in the middle of a prairie with no water around them. Most of these Superfund sites are on water.
Absolutely.
Okay? Now I want to talk about community engagement, specifically as Butte comes about, the Butte Superfund site. 2 nights ago, there was a community meeting where residents of Butte had the opportunity to express concerns about a lack of progress in effectively cleaning up the community. The readout from that meeting couldn't be clearer. Folks in Butte are frustrated with the process, and that is being kind when I say just frustrated. I'll be blunt. Mr. Administrator, you need to fix it. You need to make sure this agency is listening to folks on the ground. If it's happening in Butte, it's happening everywhere. I'm going to tell you, I could read you the news report from that meeting in Butte. There was nobody that stepped up and patted the EPA on the back and said, you guys are doing a good job. If they did, it was never reported. And quite frankly, you've got, and this has been going on a long time, man. I mean, Butte wired this country in copper, and it created one of the largest, if not the largest, Superfund site in this country. And you've got Butte, who's an incredibly resilient community, that are really sick and tired of being jacked around. And so I need your commitment that we will do, you will do, your people under you will do, the people in the communities, the people in the region are going to do their best, not only to listen, but to react to what they're hearing. Could I get that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And our people came back from that meeting in the 1st of May with that feedback taken to heart. So we're prepared to engage, and we are engaging,
So
Senator.
I just want to tell you, this has been going on for a while. I mean, like a long time, like before I got here and even longer. And I don't think the EPA has done a good job of listening to people for any time in that period. And now, you know, because there's two ways to listen. You can listen and ignore, or you can listen and take that feedback and try to do something positive for the community. That's what I want you to do.
Well, and let me just, in defense of the staff, right? I'm proud of this staff. And let me say, before the $5 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law, which we really appreciate from you all, this program was underfunded just like every other program. And so our ability to do outreach and tend to all of these Superfund sites all across the country.
We are way over, but I'm just going to tell you something. The Forest Service came in and talked about underfunding. We fixed that. We're moving forward. We're not moving backward.
I agree with you.
Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator Regan. It's nice to see you over here in a different venue. We usually see each other over on EPW. I know you've been asked this question, but I wanted to reemphasize the issue that on the CDS funding delay. We've heard a lot of complaints at home. You know, you inform folks that they're going to be able to get a certain amount, particularly in the water projects area. You know, they can't move forward with their financing without the assurances and timeliness of the funding. And so we heard, our office was notified that the FY23 community recipients of CDS did receive instructions to assist them in planning and preparing for their application process. I'm glad to see that this is moving much faster than the FY2022. What is the status? I mean, has a single FY22 CDS funding possibility, has any of those dollars gone out yet?
Well, Senator, the percentage is much smaller than I would like and any of us would like.
So has any gone out? Is the percentage bigger than zero?
Yes, we have a number that's bigger than zero that has gone out.
And what is that number?
The number is 25. 25 awards, 117 applications. Only 30 of those applications were complete, and 25 of that 30 have gone out the door. What we saw, number one in the beginning, was that EPA was significantly under-resourced and unprepared for this. But number two, many of these recipients we've had to go above and beyond to provide technical assistance to because they've never received this level of federal dollars before. So to keep everyone in compliance, we've doubled down on our technical assistance. So again, 30 completed applications, 25 of those went out the door, but we recognize we need to do better.
Okay, good. And I assume by putting out the guidance or the instructions a little bit earlier this year, you're moving in that direction. You just mentioned under-resourced, but I would point out that the EPA received $10 billion, more than $10 billion in FY23 and more than $40 billion in additional funding through the Inflation Reduction Act. Certainly that's got to have impacts on your ability to move through all of these, what we're just talking about, and other projects like Senator Chester was talking about.
Well, you know, we've been hiring up since we got some of those bill dollars, and in some cases we are looking at cross-pollination opportunities for those staff members. But again, we received significant resources under Bill and IRA focused on specific projects, and so we've put people forward to complete those tasks. And where we can leverage staff, we are.
I want to talk to you about the EPA modeling that shows a direct and very dramatic decline in coal-fired power over the next 17 years based on the Inflation Reduction Act. It's 43% more coal retirements than EPA projected originally without the law. This recent modeling does not account for the EPA's upcoming Clean Power 2.0 rule, which I would like to find out where that is. Or the rules that you have issued in the last few months, whether it's new standards on wastewater from coal plants or mercury emissions. You and I have talked numerous times about this issue and what the impacts of some of this is to our state, my state of West Virginia. So are you going to update your modeling once you put out your new Clean Power Plan and other rules? Will you continue to update this so we can see what the real impacts are going to be? Have you looked at what those would be in terms of the economic impacts and the job impacts in certain areas? Obviously, that's going to impact my state a lot. So where are you on updating in terms of as you're rolling out new and more stringent requirements through your regulations?
Well, as we look at our power plant regulation, which should be coming in the coming weeks, it'll have the corresponding modeling and cost-benefit analysis with that rule. I would love to have my team come and sit down with yours to walk through all of the modeling and all of the cost-benefit analysis for those rules that are currently out, and after we finish with interagency review on the power plant rule, do the same thing with that regulation as well.
Does the cost-benefit analysis include the number of jobs that would be lost and what the impacts that would be to the community?
Let me get back to you on the cost-benefit analysis in all of our rules are very complex, and I'm sure you can tease out a number of things in that analysis. So what I'd like to do is have my team spend some time with you on all of the impacts, positive and potential adverse impacts for any of these categories on any of the rules that we put out.
Let me ask you about the Class 6 well applications for individual projects, for which that's the state primacy applications for the CCUS technology. I know my colleague here to my left, Senator Hoeven, and I are very, very interested in making sure that we're moving forward on not just the technology, and I know your state regulator has done, because you have primacy, don't you? Right. Yeah, has done a lot. So you have, at the EPA, you have 70 individual permit applications for Class 6 injection wells, but I don't know that any have actually been permitted. Louisiana just got their Class 6 state primacy application. I think West Virginia is very much in the queue here. What measures has the EPA taken to ensure that Class 6 sequestration permits are prioritized and are done in a timely manner? And how do you account for, I know in North Dakota, because we had their state regulator before our committee over on EPW, said that the time that they can move their applications through much quicker and have actually had successful applications, meet success, whereas the ones that are still at EPA are still languishing. How do you account for that, and what is your plan to make sure that those move quicker?
Well, so our Class 6 well application program is absolutely a priority. I think the President has indicated that CCS is something that this administration supports. We've learned a lot of lessons from states like North Dakota. We have just approved Louisiana's, and Louisiana's actually will serve as a model for all of the states that we plan to move forward with. We've got a very productive relationship with the governor of West Virginia and the state of West Virginia on their Class 6 well application, and that application is going through the process. So I think we've got some uniformity across all of our regions to be sure that all of our states are submitting similar applications so that we can put them on an expedited timeline.
Well, I would hope that, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know I'm out. I hope they would move quicker. I think that state primacy issue is absolutely critical to move forward to cleaner environment, to capturing and sequestering and utilizing the carbon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Capito. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Regan, it's good to see you here today. Thank you for your testimony. Administrator, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative was established, as you know, in 2009 to accelerate efforts to protect and restore the largest system of fresh water in the world, the Great Lakes. As Michiganders, the Great Lakes are not only in our DNA, but are a critical resource for drinking water. In fact, 40 million people drink water out of the Great Lakes, but also in terms of economic growth and job creation, they're incredibly important. Since 2010, the GLRI has provided over $2.9 billion to fund over 6,000 projects throughout the Great Lakes region, including $762 million for 880 projects in my state of Michigan. The GLRI has been a catalyst, without question, for unprecedented federal agency coordination through the Interagency Task Force and the Regional Working Group, which is led by the EPA. GLR resources have been used to fund thousands of projects to restore and improve water quality, to protect native habitat, and prevent and control invasive species, and as well as other environmental problems we face. So my question for you, sir, as chair of the Great Lakes Interagency Task Force, can you speak to how the task force, through its regional working group, selects the best combination of programs and projects to help improve water quality as well as accelerate the protection and restoration of the Great Lakes?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that, and thank you for your leadership and Senator Stabenow's leadership on this issue. This initiative was allocated $1 billion under bipartisan infrastructure law in fiscal year 2022. And in our budget for 2024, we're requesting the same level that we requested in 2023 because we want to keep up the critical work, keep the momentum. On the task force, our Great Lakes National Program Office chairs one of the regional working groups, which consists of representatives from 16 federal partners. So we're seeing a lot of partnership, and we're seeing a lot of excitement, especially with this infusion of capital. We take the lead on the GLRI planning and budgeting, which is done 2 years in advance to help plan for the president's budget. So we believe that we have a lot of momentum, we have a lot of participation across the federal family, and we have the resources to tackle this issue.
Great, wonderful. PFAS contamination exposure has devastated many communities in Michigan as well as across the country, and for far too long. PFAS contamination, as you're well aware, is not just an environmental threat, but it's a danger to public health and devastates local economies. And we have to do everything we can to address the impact of these toxic chemicals. And that's why I want to first off say I was pleased to see the EPA designate two of the most notorious PFAS compounds, PFOA and PFAS, as hazardous substances under the Superfund program last year. I was also pleased to see last month's announcement that EPA is considering expanding the list of PFAS that are designated as hazardous under the Superfund. So my question for you, sir, is can you speak to the importance of classifying PFAS under Superfund, as well as what the EPA's plans are to ensure that state agencies and affected communities are actually part of these cleanup decisions that are being made?
Well, absolutely, and I can say as former state regulator in North Carolina, the relationship that the states and the federal government have is so important. Many of our state agencies have the delegated authority to implement on clean air and clean water statutes, and so having that state and local and federal cooperation is extremely important, not just on the implementation side, but definitely on the planning side. We have taken important steps in proposing to designate 2 PFAS under CERCLA, and we believe that it's not only our jobs to prevent this forever chemical from entering and polluting, but also, if it does, we have to clean it up. And so we're excited about where we are in that interagency process. We've worked hand in hand with USDA and the Department of Defense as well. And we believe we're making significant progress, not just setting drinking water standards, but to the point you're making, setting up the cleanup standards as well.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, I appreciate the 2 of those substances were part of your action. But as you know, PFAS encompasses hundreds of different variations of that chemical, and we would assume that they also present significant hazards as being part of that family. So my question for you is, can you commit to establishing national primary drinking water regulations for additional types of PFAS as soon as possible, or give us some idea of how you plan to progress on dealing with the broader issue of a very large family of dangerous chemicals.
Absolutely. I can commit to saying this, which is we have designated 6. We've got 29 additional on our radar. As we get the science and as we get the data in, and we will continue to work across our federal family, especially with CDC and others, to determine the health impacts, we will continue to move forward, designating these dangerous chemical compounds and regulating them accordingly.
Good, good. So I appreciate that effort. It's a big job, and appreciate your focus on it.
Thank you.
The next question is that federal research efforts have often been fragmented at various federal agencies and have struggled to address really the full scope of the problems of PFAS. That's why I introduced the Federal PFAS Research Evaluation Act. It's co-sponsored by a bipartisan group of Senators Moran, Shaheen, and Durbin to direct a study by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine to help inform decisions by the federal government, state governments, industry, and other stakeholders as to how we deal with these complex substances. So my question for you is, would you please, or can you speak to the importance of having a more comprehensive federal research approach to better inform PFAS mitigation efforts and ultimately to help families and first responders and our environment that are all impacted by these substances?
It's absolutely imperative that we have additional research into this chemical compound and into the technologies that will deter this from entering our bodies. That's why we've asked for about $170 million in the budget for 2024 so that we can keep pace with the research and development being done with our federal family counterparts, as well as what's happening in academia and at the state level. We need to get a handle on this science and the health impacts. We're going to work across the federal family, state and local agencies as well, and academia to be sure that we're competitive. And the $170 million that we're requesting for the budget will go a long way.
Great. Thank you, Administrator. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Recently, the Congress, good to see you, Mr. Administrator. Thanks for being here. Recently, the Congress voted on a bipartisan basis to overturn the WOTUS rule put forward by the Biden administration. Also, then shortly thereafter, a judge issued a preliminary injunction that affects 24 states, including my state of North Dakota, staying the new rule. So, given that Sackett versus EPA is in front of the Supreme Court and it's likely to provide clarity as to what EPA's authority is over states and landowners in regard to regulating the waters of the U.S., doesn't it make sense to put a nationwide pause on your WOTUS rule until the Supreme Court has ruled in the Sackett case?
Where we see in those 26 or so states that the courts
24.
have weighed in, there is an active stay, and we will be implementing WOTUS under the 2015 regime, where the states that don't have a stay in place will continue to move forward. We do believe that, number one, I engage significantly with our agricultural industry, and I appreciate you. And
you've been out to our state, and you've seen our concerns about the WOTUS rule.
Yes, I have. And what we attempted to do was take those concerns, match them with the laws that we're required to follow, and we codified a number of exclusions and exemptions that we were really proud of that many of the ag community asked us to do. Unfortunately, in the states where that stay is in place, and we go back to 2015, those exemptions and exclusions are not as clear and available to our farming community, but we'll continue to work around that. I think the Sackett case will provide some clarity in all of the questions that we have. The good news is we won't be starting from scratch. We'll be starting with a rule that we put in place that some states have stayed. We'll take the Sackett case, we'll adjust the rule, and we'll be able to move forward, and we won't be starting from 2 years behind. I want to just say that the previous administration's WOTUS rule was vacated, and so we felt compelled to move forward and engage with our agricultural community to try to put a durable rule in place that will provide some certainty and codify many of these exclusions and exemptions that we attempted to move forward with.
The current rule doesn't do that, and you recognize and acknowledge that the Congress on a bipartisan basis voted against the rule. You do acknowledge that?
I acknowledge that for 3 or 4 administrations, multiple courts have weighed in, the Supreme Court has weighed in. No one has ever been pleased with WOTUS, and I recognize that. I will say that we did our level best to learn from all of what we've seen in the past to put forward a doable rule, and we find ourselves where we are.
Second, should provide some clarity, but we're very concerned about protecting private property rights. I also want to ask you about the MATS rule. Actually, the EPA, existing EPA regulatory rule, and then your own study indicates that the rule you have in place prior to issuing this new MATS rule has the mercury emissions below levels of concern, has reduced it to below levels of concern from a public health standpoint. That's your own study determination. So why are you proposing new rules that put additional burdens and costs on electric plants when we very much need that electricity?
I think when we took a look at the necessary aspect of that rule, we came to the conclusion that there needed to be further reductions of mercury to protect human health. And we also took a look at, and I believe that many of the power sector industry would agree, that the control technologies that exist to control mercury to the levels that we'd like to see to protect public health exist in a very cost-effective way. Many of them already have various aspects of those technologies on their plants. And so we believe that in following the law and following the science in a cost-effective way, we could continue to drive mercury emissions down to protect public health.
Well, the whole point is your own study shows that we're already doing that, and now you're adding additional regulation and cost to a coal-fired electric industry that is working mightily to capture and store CO2, which you know we're doing in our state. That new technology, so whether it's been SOx, NOx, mercury, and now CO2, the industry is undertaking investment to capture those emissions and address them, and now with CO2, which is very, very expensive. So you're adding regulatory burden at a time when they are investing and working mightily to provide baseload electricity to the grid, which is very much needed, and capture CO2 as well. And you need to keep that in mind. Here, I'm going to give you another example and ask you to respond to it. You now are looking at lignite coal and subbituminous coal and trying to apply the exact same standards to both when they're very different. And so we need you to work with our industry to make these investments to capture the very emissions that you want to see, like CO2, that you want to see captured and stored. You've got to work with the industry if you want that to happen.
You're absolutely right in terms of having to work with the industry, which, you know, I think we're doing a fairly good job of that. And I think many of the examples that you cited, North Dakota is doing a good job in pursuing some of those advanced technologies like CCS and other technologies. And so I think you and I are saying, singing from a similar sheet of music, which is these technologies that are already being deployed in many of our states do have a lot of co-benefits which prove we can drive some of this pollution down. We've got some in the industry that are lagging behind and not performing as well as some of the utilities in your state. We'd like for them to pursue some of these cost-effective technologies like CCS, advanced mercury scrubbing technologies to ensure that the industry is keeping pace at a unified level.
We're already capturing millions of tons of CO2, but we need help and regulatory certainty in order to keep doing that and do more of it.
And that's why we've worked really hard, and this is something that I've spoken with the industry about at length for the last year and a half, 2 years. This is why we're putting all of our rules out together. The industry has asked for these to be bundled so that they can look at all of the impacts, the potential co-benefits from investing in technologies, and make those longer-term investments. And what this EPA has done and pledged is that we would put these rules out together, and that's what we have done.
Thank you, Administrator.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Murkowski. Mr. Administrator, great to see you and your team here today. And let me start with a thank you. I want to thank you and your team for keeping me and my team regularly apprised of the progress on the implementation of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. As you know, this has been something I've worked on for well over a decade, starting during my time in the House of Representatives with what was then called the Green Bank. Senator Markey and I then introduced the National Climate Bank legislation. It's been called the Clean Energy Accelerator. We're pleased to see the President embrace it. And now, obviously, we're in the work of implementation, which is absolutely critical that it be successful. So thank you for those consultations. I just want to affirm that we're on the same page with respect to the goals. Number one, to achieve the greenhouse gas emissions that were allocated a target for this particular fund. Number two, to ensure it has a multiplier effect. I mean, the idea is that this will be matched by private sector and other funds so that we have up to a 5-time multiplier effect. That would ensure sustainability, which is another key factor. This is not a pot of money for grant funding that we turn around one day and it's all gone. And fourth, and very importantly, that we make sure that the funds are invested to help underserved communities as part of this transition to a clean energy economy. I just want your assurance today that those remain principles that you're committed to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to take this time to thank you and your team. I think, but for you and Senator Markey and others, we wouldn't have this significant opportunity. $27 billion is a lot of money. But in the full scheme of things, it's not a lot of money, and we need to have that multiplier effect. We need to be sure that we are putting programs in place that can be leveraged by those who invest, as their day jobs, right? And we also want to be sure that every single person in this country benefits from it. So we share those goals, and we have enjoyed the conversations with your team. Our product is better because of those conversations.
I appreciate that, Mr. Administrator. And as you know, my view is that this can be most effective by creating, at most a few national networks that have to be national in scope, that include, existing green banks, but also include CDFI and other lenders. We want to make sure that it has that ability to coordinate, because we do want to be able to, come to you a couple years from now and say, hey, how are we doing in terms of our greenhouse gas emission reductions goal? How are we doing in terms of meeting our goal of ensuring low-income communities are participating in the transition? And I think that is much better achieved by having at least a national network that's coordinating all of this. Let me, just another thank you, because for years Maryland worked to try to get the EPA to adopt the air pollution good neighbor rule, because we receive lots of air pollution transiting from other states into our air and into the Bay. So just a thank you for having moved forward on that. Let me talk briefly about the Back River wastewater infrastructure. As you know, the Maryland senators and our congressional delegation from Baltimore objected to the proposal to transfer some of the wastewater from the East Palestine derailment through the Back River plant in Baltimore. And I'm glad that that plan did not go forward. The reason we objected, as you know and your team knows, is that because Back River plant has had a history of problems, chronic problems itself, and we didn't want to take any additional risk that more pollution would enter our waterways as a result of that contaminated water from Palestine. That said, we are continuing to work on Back River, and obviously the funds in the bipartisan infrastructure bill for the revolving fund are important, but just ask for your commitment today, Mr. Administrator, that you work with us on Back River, because that has had a series of problems, and we want to make sure we work in partnership with you and your team to correct them.
Absolutely. You have my commitment, and our team has been paying close attention to that. I've actually talked with Assistant Administrator Rodica Fox about that particular facility, so you have our commitment.
Thank you, because it's an ongoing project, as you know. Let me now turn to the Chesapeake Bay and the EPA program. Very gratified to see that the administration requested the full authorization of $92 million. This has been an ongoing and urgent priority for our region, and I would argue very important for the country as well as the nation's largest estuary. I am also pleased with the current proposed settlement to the lawsuit that was brought to ensure enforcement of the goals to clean up the bay. As you know, unfortunately, we are falling short of the targets. We had a plan to try to achieve the reductions in what we call the total maximum daily load into the bay by 2025. We are not hitting that target. Everyone sees that. It is vital that we reestablish aggressive pollution reduction targets and dates. And I do think that this proposed settlement, which I expect will be finalized shortly, will help accomplish that. But if you could just comment on why this is important. This is a multi-state, the Chesapeake Bay, obviously, its watershed encompasses multiple states, including Pennsylvania. There's no secret that we've been very concerned about pollution coming down the Susquehanna River. Part of this settlement is designed to address that through greater enforcement. Can you talk about EPA's commitment to making sure that this settlement is enforced, assuming it goes forward?
Well, absolutely. I'll say that I proudly serve as the current chair of the Chesapeake Bay Executive Council, and have been enjoying the engagements and look forward to engaging this multi-state body. If once the settlement is achieved, and hopefully we will get the resources we're requesting in this budget, I believe that we can effectively execute on the settlement, but also enhance our engagement with our agriculture community and others who are contributing in a negative way to the Chesapeake Bay. I think we also had a meeting where we needed to recalibrate those 2025 goals. So I'm committed. I'm chairing this executive council. I'm committed to recalibrating the 2025 goals, and I'm committed to bringing us all together to ensure that we restore the health and vibrancy of the Chesapeake Bay.
Mr. Administrator, thank you. Music to my ears. It requires resources, yes, but it also requires a political commitment from the federal government and EPA. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. And we're going to try to do a speed round here in which I have several questions that you can feel free to give very short answers to, and Senator Murkowski has a couple as well. And then we're dashing to the vote that's currently underway. So here we go. Can I have your assurance that any permitting reform that you support will not allow higher levels of toxins to be released in frontline communities?
Yes.
Thank you. And does that include the permitting of any new so-called chemical recycling facilities that vent off significant toxins that might increase pollution in frontline communities?
And the way you'll see both of those is our technical advice to the legislation. Obviously, we'll weigh in as mightily as we can. We know that we need to see permitting reform. But in that technical advice that we provide to Congress, we will be sure to flag those things because they're important to us.
These will be issues I'll be paying close attention to. And do I have your support in figuring out how we allow prescribed fires while also being very strong in regarding generalized PM 2.5 pollution?
Yes, we can do both.
Thank you. I'll have more questions for the record, but let me turn this over to my colleague from Alaska.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Regan, I know that Senator Capito had discussed with you or raised the issue about EPA's Class 6 wells program for carbon sequestration. It's something that Alaska is obviously very interested in. We've got a strong commitment to responsible stewardship, and we've got geological storage potential. So we look at this with real opportunity. I have expressed some concern, again, about the pace of processing the individual permits. Just want to know that you also view the agency Class 6 wells program as an administration priority.
I do, yes.
Good. We look forward to working with you on that. Very quickly, we know that EPA is moving forward with the new standards on both light and medium-duty vehicles and heavy-duty truck emissions. It's a pretty aggressive timeline there. In fact, it's even more aggressive than President Biden's stated goal that EVs are going to make up 50% of the new cars sold by 2030. We all recognize that these goals are going to require a significant increase in minerals needed to supply the EVs. Did the EPA conduct a needs assessment on the amount of minerals that would be required if these rules move forward and go into effect?
We're very cognizant of the need, and we're very cognizant of the broader federal family approach to minerals, to domestic manufacturing, and the tax incentives and the like. So our rules are technology standards. We have a limited scope that we're allowed to look at, but you can rest assured that the broader federal family goals resulting from IRA and bill were taken into consideration as we move forward.
I think we recognize we not only need the minerals, but we're going to have to do more to promote some efficiencies and deal with a permitting issue, something that we're all talking about here on a bipartisan basis. And then lastly, and this should be the real easy one, is I appreciate the progress that we have made on our Alaska-specific issues. I'd like to, again, encourage that we have set quarterly calls with senior staff from the agency. We call it the All Things Alaska call. We've had these agreements with previous administrations, and I would just like your commitment to have your team meet with mine on a quarterly basis.
Absolutely.
Very good. Thank you. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
Thank you. And if there are no other statements, the hearing record will be open until close of business on May 17th, 2023. Administrator Regan, you've covered a huge range of topics in this hearing, and I'm sure there'll be a few more and some follow-up questions. Thank you for your service to our country. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.